I never thought silence could weigh so much. It pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating, as I sat in our living room, the ticking of the old clock on the mantel slicing through the stillness. My wife, Clara, had been gone for 3 days. A business trip, she'd said. Some conference in Chicago for her marketing firm. I didn't question it. Why would I? She'd packed her suitcase with that same meticulous care she always had, folded blouses, her favorite navy skirt, the little silver necklace I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. "I'll be back before you know it, Daniel," she'd said, kissing my cheek. Her lips were warm then. I believed her. The house felt wrong without her. Too big. Too empty. I'm not a sentimental man. Never have been. But I missed the way she'd hum while cooking, the way her laughter would spill into the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. We'd been married 8 years, and sure, things weren't perfect. I was distant sometimes, too caught up in my work at the garage, fixing engines instead of fixing us. She'd nag me about it, her voice sharp, but her eyes soft. I thought we were fine. Not great, maybe, but fine. That morning, day 4 of her trip, I got the call. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with her name. Clara calling. My heart lifted a little. Maybe she missed me too. I answered, gruff as always. "Hey, you surviving without me?" There was a pause. Too long. Then her voice came through, shaky, like she'd been crying. "Daniel. I need to tell you something." My stomach twisted. I sat up straighter, the leather couch creaking under me. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew it wasn't good. She didn't answer right away. I heard a breath, a sniffle, and then I made a mistake. A mistake. That's what she called it. My mind raced, but I stayed silent, waiting. She didn't elaborate, not then. "I'll explain when I get home tomorrow," she said. "Please, just don't hate me." The line went dead before I could respond. Hate her? Why would I hate her? I stared at the phone, my thumb hovering over the call button. Something cold settled in my chest, sharp and jagged, like a shard of ice. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, in the dark, replaying her words. A mistake. What kind of mistake? A work thing? An argument? Or something else? I pushed the thought away, but it clawed its way back, gnawing at me. By morning, I was a mess, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling as I brewed coffee I wouldn't drink. I told myself I'd wait. She'd explain. We'd figure it out. But then the mail came. The mail truck rumbled past our house at exactly 10:17 a.m. I know because I've been watching the clock, counting the minutes until Clara's return tomorrow. I didn't usually care about the mail bills, junk, the occasional car magazine, but something pulled me outside that day. Maybe it was the restlessness, the need to move, to do anything but sit in that suffocating silence. I shuffled to the mailbox in my slippers, the February air biting at my unshaven face. There it was, tucked between a grocery flyer and a utility bill, a plain white envelope. No return address. My name, Daniel Grayson, scrawled in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. I frowned, turning it over. No stamp either. Someone had dropped it off by hand. My fingers hesitated as I tore it open, a strange dread pooling in my gut. Inside was a single photograph. No note, no explanation, just the image. It was Clara. My Clara. She was laughing, her head tilted back, sunlight catching the strands of her auburn hair. She looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in months. But it wasn't me beside her. It was a man, tall, lean, with dark hair and a camera slung around his neck. His arm was around her waist, casual, possessive. They were standing in front of a fountain, water sparkling behind them. Chicago, I guessed. The conference. My hand shook. The edges of the photo crumpled under my grip. Who was he? Why was he touching her like that? I flipped it over, desperate for answers, and there it was, a date stamped in tiny print. February 19th, 2025. 2 days ago. My breath caught, a ragged sound escaping my throat. She'd been with him. Not at some conference, not in meetings, but with him. I stumbled back inside, the envelope falling to the floor. My mind spiraled, piecing it together. Her shaky voice on the phone. I made a mistake. This was her mistake. Not a spilled coffee or a missed deadline, this. Rage flickered in me, hot and sudden, but it was drowned by something worse. Betrayal. 8 years. 8 years of late nights, quiet mornings, shared dreams, and she'd thrown it away for some stranger with a camera. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that photo on the kitchen counter. Minutes? Hours? The clock ticked on, mocking me. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Clara. Landing tomorrow at 3. Can we talk? Can we talk? Like it was a casual chat about groceries. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed to the garage, my sanctuary, my escape. I needed to think. I needed to plan. But as I drove, that photo burned in my mind. And with it, something dark began to grow. The garage smelled of oil and metal, a familiar comfort that usually steadied me. Not today. I slammed the door of my pickup truck behind me, the clang echoing off the concrete walls. My tools gleamed on the workbench, wrenches, pliers, a hammer I'd used 1,000 times. I wanted to smash something, anything, to make the ache in my chest stop. But I didn't. I just stood there, breathing hard, the photograph of Clara and that man searing my thoughts. I'd always been cold, she'd said once. Cruel, even. Maybe she was right. I wasn't the type to beg or plead, not when we fought. Not when her mother died and she needed me to say more than, I'm sorry. I fixed things. Cars, mostly. People? Not so much. But I'd loved her in my own way. Hadn't I? Now, that love felt like a rusted engine, broken, useless. I tossed my keys onto the bench and noticed something odd. A small, black memory card, half hidden under a rag. It wasn't mine. I didn't use cameras, never cared for them. Curious, I picked it up, turning it between my fingers. It must have fallen out of Clara's bag last week when she'd stopped by to borrow my socket wrench for work. Work. Right. My pulse quickened. What was on it? I didn't have a card reader, but my buddy Mike did. He ran the auto shop next door and was always tinkering with tech. Hey, Mike. I called, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. He poked his head out from under a hood, wiping grease off his hands. You got a sec? 10 minutes later, we were crowded around his battered laptop. The memory card clicked into place, and a folder popped up. Photos. Dozens of them. My throat tightened as Mike scrolled through Clara at the conference, Clara by that fountain, Clara with him. The photographer. Some shots were professional, her posing, smiling for his lens. Others were candid, intimate in a way that made my stomach lurch. Her hand on his arm. His grin as he leaned close. And then a selfie. Them together, cheeks pressed, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in years. Who's this guy? Mike asked, oblivious to the storm brewing in me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My fist clenched, nails digging into my palms. Thanks, I muttered, yanking the card out and storming back to my side of the garage. Mike called after me, but I didn't stop. Back alone, I stared at that card, a tiny thing holding the wreckage of my life. She hadn't just slipped up. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a story, days, maybe weeks, of secrets. And I'd been blind. The cold part of me, the part Clara hated, woke up then. It whispered, she chose this. She chose him. I didn't know his name yet, but I would. And when I did, he'd pay. The sun dipped low, painting the garage walls in streaks of orange and shadow. I sat on a stool, the memory card spinning between my fingers like a coin I couldn't stop flipping. Heads, rage. Tails, despair. It landed on rage every time. I needed to know who he was, this photographer who'd stolen my wife, my life. Clara's flight wouldn't land until tomorrow, and waiting was torture. I had to act. I grabbed my laptop from the truck, an old, clunky thing I barely used, and plugged in the memory card. The photos loaded again, each one a fresh stab. I studied him. Sharp jaw, artsy scarf, that smug way he held his camera. I zoomed in on one image, a candid of him adjusting his lens while Clara watched, smiling. Something caught my eye, a logo on his camera strap. Evan Tate Photography. A name. My pulse thudded. Evan Tate. I opened a browser and typed it in, hands trembling. A website popped up, clean, professional, full of artsy shots. Weddings, landscapes, portraits. There he was, grinning in an About Me section. Evan Tate, capturing life's moments with passion and precision. Based in Chicago. Passion. Precision. I wanted to rip those words apart. I scrolled further, testimonials, a blog. Then, a post dated 3 days ago. Loving this marketing conference shoot. Great people, great vibes. A photo of Clara was attached, her head thrown back in laughter. My Clara. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. Evan Tate. He wasn't just some random fling. He documented her, framed her like a prize. My chest burned, and that cold, cruel part of me, the part that didn't forgive, took over. She'd be home tomorrow. I'd confront her. But him? He'd feel this now. I was about to grab my keys when the garage door creaked open. I froze. A figure stepped in, small, hunched, silhouetted against the twilight. Daniel? A voice rasped. It was Mrs. Hargrove, our nosy neighbor. She clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her eyes wide. I saw something. Thought you should know. What? I snapped, harsher than I meant. She flinched, but pressed on. Last week, before Clara left, a man came by. Tall, dark hair. Dropped something off. I didn't think much of it, but then I saw you today, looking so lost. She hesitated. Was he trouble? My mind reeled. Evan, dear? At my house? What did he drop off? I asked, voice low, dangerous. She shrugged. Couldn't see. An envelope? Maybe. He left quick. An envelope. The photo in the mail. He'd been here, on my doorstep, taunting me. Thanks, I muttered, turning away. Mrs. Hargrove lingered, then shuffled out. Alone again, I stared at the memory card. He hadn't just taken Clara. He'd invaded my world. Mocked me. The rage wasn't flickering anymore. It was a wildfire. And I knew where to aim it. The garage lights buzzed overhead, a harsh hum that matched the chaos in my head. Evan Tate. His name was a splinter under my skin, festering, driving me mad. He'd been here, at my house, leaving that photo like a hunter marking his kill. And Clara, she'd let him in. Maybe not through the front door, but into her life, her heart. 8 years of us, and she'd traded it for some slick photographer with a scarf and a smirk. I paced the concrete floor, boots scuffing against oil stains, my shadow stretching and twisting like the man I was becoming. I couldn't wait for her to come home. Couldn't sit through her teary excuses or watch her lips form lies. No, I needed answers now, and I needed him to hurt. The memory card sat on the workbench, taunting me with its secrets. I snatched it up and shoved it into my pocket, then grabbed my jacket. The truck keys jangled in my hand as I stormed outside, the night air sharp and cold against my face. February 22nd, 2025. The day I stopped being Daniel Grayson, husband, mechanic, and started being something else. Chicago was 3 hours away. I didn't care. The highway stretched out, a black ribbon under a starless sky, and I pushed the truck hard, the engine roaring like the fury in my chest. My mind churned. Evan Tate Photography. His website had his studio address, some trendy loft in the Arts District. I'd find him. I'd make him feel what I felt. The photo of him and Clara flashed behind my eyes, her laugh, his arm around her. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. Clara. I ignored it, but it buzzed again, then again. A voicemail popped up. Against my better judgment, I hit play, her voice crackling through the truck speakers. Daniel, it's me. I know you're mad. I know I messed up. Please, just let me explain. It's not what you think. I'm landing tomorrow, and I love you. I do. Call me. Her voice broke at the end, a sob cutting through the static. I slammed the dashboard with my fist. Love me? She didn't know what love was. Not anymore. The city loomed ahead, its lights smearing into a hazy glow. I pulled into a gas station just outside Chicago, my hands shaking as I filled the tank. A plan was forming, cold, precise, cruel. I'd find his studio, break in, destroy his cameras, his work, everything he cared about. And if he was there, well, I'd figure that out when I saw him. The hammer from my workbench was in the passenger seat, its weight a promise. Back on the road, I punched his address into my GPS 1427, North Halsted Street. The Arts District was quiet when I arrived, the streets lined with brick buildings and hipster cafes closed for the night. His studio was on the second floor of a converted warehouse, a neon sign flickering. Evan Tate Photography. I parked a block away, grabbed the hammer, and slipped it into my jacket. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. The building's front door was locked, but a fire escape hung loose on the side. I climbed, metal creaking under my weight, and reached a window. It was cracked open, just enough. I pried it wider and slid inside, landing in a dark hallway. The air smelled of chemicals and coffee. His studio door was ahead, glass-paned, his name stenciled in gold. I tested the handle. Unlocked. Idiot. Inside, it was a shrine to his ego. Framed photos lined the walls, portraits, landscapes, Clara. My Clara, staring back at me from a dozen angles, her eyes bright, her smile wide. I wanted to rip them down, but I held back. Not yet. A desk sat in the corner, cluttered with lenses and notebooks. I rummaged through it, looking for something, anything to tell me more. A business card caught my eye. Evan Tate, freelance photographer. Call me. 312-555-0192. I pocketed it. Then I found a journal. I flipped it open, my breath hitching. Dates. Notes. February 15th. Met C at the conference. Instant connection. February 17th. Dinner with C. She's incredible. February 19th. Shot her by the fountain. She's my muse. My muse. My hands trembled as I turned the page. February 20th. Dropped the photo at her place. Hope he sees it. He. Me. He'd meant for me to find it. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a game. A noise snapped me out of it, a key turning in the lock. I ducked behind a partition as the door swung open. Evan Tate stepped in, his scarf loose around his neck, a camera bag slung over his shoulder. He froze, sensing something off. "Hello," he called, voice smooth, cautious. I gripped the hammer, my pulse a war drum. He flicked on the lights, and I saw him clearly, taller than I'd thought, his face sharper. He set the bag down and moved toward the desk. I stepped out, hammer raised. He spun, eyes widening. "Who the hell?" he started, but I cut him off, my voice ice. "You know who I am." Recognition flickered in his gaze, then fear. "Daniel." "Listen, man." I didn't let him finish. The hammer swung, not at him, not yet, but at the desk. Glass shattered, papers flew. He stumbled back, hands up. "Stop. Let's talk." "Talk?" I snarled, advancing. "You took my wife. You came to my house. You don't get to talk." Another swing, his camera bag hit the floor, lenses spilling out. He lunged for it, desperate, and I saw red. I grabbed his collar, slamming him against the wall. Photos rattled loose, Clara's face staring up at us. "Why her?" I demanded, my voice breaking despite the rage. "Why my wife?" He coughed, struggling. "It wasn't planned. She was lonely. You weren't there." The words hit like a punch, but I tightened my grip. "You don't know me," I hissed. His eyes darted to the hammer, then back to me. "You're right," he gasped. "I don't. But she does. Ask her about the letter." "Letter?" I froze, confusion cutting through the haze. "What letter?" He smirked, even pinned. "The one she wrote you. Before she left. Check her suitcase." I shoved him harder, then let go. He slumped, breathing ragged. A letter. Another secret. I didn't finish him, not then. I smashed one more frame, Clara's portrait, glass exploding across the floor. "Stay away from her," I warned, voice low, lethal. Then I left, hammer still in hand, his words echoing. A letter. I had to get home. I had to know. The drive back was a blur, my mind a battlefield. What had she written? What else had she hidden? Evan's blood wasn't on my hands, yet, but the night wasn't over. The highway stretched endless and black as I sped back from Chicago, the hammer rattling on the passenger seat beside me. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel, my chest tight with a storm I couldn't name. Rage, grief, something uglier. Evan's words looped in my head. Ask her about the letter. A letter. In her suitcase. What had she written that he knew about, and I didn't? The truck's engine growled, mirroring the fury I'd unleashed in his studio, but now doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Had I missed something? Had I been blind longer than I thought? It was past midnight when I pulled into our driveway, the house looming dark and silent. February 22nd, 2025, bleeding into the 23rd, a date I'd never forget. I killed the engine and sat there, staring at the front door. Clara wouldn't land until 3 p.m. tomorrow today. Now, but her suitcase was still here, packed and waiting by the hall closet where she'd left it. I'd seen it before she'd gone, assumed it was just clothes and conference notes. Now it felt like a Pandora's box, holding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I grabbed the hammer, more out of habit than intent, and went inside. The air was stale, heavy with the ghost of her presence. Her perfume lingered faintly, a cruel reminder. I flicked on the hall light and dragged the suitcase out, a sleek black thing with a combination lock. 0-8-1-6, our anniversary. It clicked open, and I hesitated, my breath catching. What was I about to find? Inside were her blouses, her skirt, neatly folded as always. I dug deeper, shoes, a conference badge, a half-empty water bottle. Then, tucked into a side pocket, an envelope. My name in her cursive, Daniel. My hand shook as I tore it open, the paper crisp, her handwriting trembling across the page. I sank onto the floor, the suitcase spilling beside me, and read, Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm already gone to Chicago to the conference. I don't know if I'll have the courage to give this to you when I get back, so I'm writing it now, before everything changes. I've been unhappy. Not because of you, not entirely, but because of us. We've drifted. You're cold sometimes, and I'm tired of begging for warmth. I met someone. His name's Evan. He's a photographer, hired for the event. It started as nothing, talking, laughing, but it's more now. I don't know what I'll do. I don't want to hurt you, but I'm drowning here. I'm sorry. I love you still, but I don't know if that's enough. Clara. I read it twice, 3 times, the words blurring as my eyes burned. She'd written this before she left. Before the fountain, the photos, the mistake. She'd known. Planned. And Evan, he'd seen this, somehow. Dropped that photo to twist the knife. My Clara, confessing she was drowning while I'd been too busy with engines to notice. I crumpled the letter, a raw sound tearing from my throat. Not a yell, not a sob, but something broken in between. The room spun. I stumbled to the kitchen, slamming the letter on the counter next to that first photo, her laughing with him. The contrast gutted me. She'd been unhappy, yes, but she'd chosen him over me. Over us. I'd thought I was the cruel one, but this was cruelty. Writing it down, leaving it for me to find, letting him taunt me with it. My fist clenched, nails biting into my palms until I felt blood. Then the phone rang. I froze, the sound shrill in the silence. It was 1:47 a.m. Who? The screen lit up. Unknown number. I answered, my voice a growl. What? Daniel Grayson? A man's voice, clipped, unfamiliar. This is Detective Paulson, Chicago PD. We've got a situation. You know an Evan Tate? My heart stopped. Yeah, I said, slow, wary. Why? He's in the hospital. Assaulted in his studio tonight. Broken ribs, concussion. Says it was you. A pause. Where are you right now? My mind raced. Evan, alive, talking. I'd left him breathing, but hurt. Hadn't meant to go that far. Had I? Home, I said, flat. Just got back from a drive. We'll need you to come in. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., precinct on Halstead. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone, then at the hammer on the counter, its head flecked with plaster from his studio. Assault. Police. This was real now, tangled, messy, out of my control. But that wasn't the twist that broke me. As I stood there, reeling, a knock rattled the front door. I stiffened, grabbing the hammer instinctively. Who'd come at this hour? Mrs. Hargrove again? Cops already? I crept to the peephole, heart pounding. A woman stood there, short, blonde, unfamiliar, clutching a coat against the cold. I opened the door an inch. What do you want? Her eyes were red, frantic. Are you Daniel? Clara's husband? I nodded, uneasy. Yeah. Who are you? She swallowed hard, voice trembling. I'm Lily, Evan's sister. I know what happened, what he did with Clara. I'm sorry, but you need to know something. She glanced around, nervous. Can I come in? I stepped back, wary, hammer still in hand. She slipped inside, shutting the door fast. Clara didn't just meet Evan at the conference, she blurted. They've known each other for months. Since last fall. He's been obsessed with her, stalking her. Almost. I told him to stop, but he wouldn't. He bragged about that photo, about getting to you. My stomach dropped. Months. Not days, not a fling, months. Why tell me this? I asked, voice low, dangerous. Lily's lip quivered. Because he's not the victim here. He's unhinged. And Clara, she didn't want this, not at first. He pushed her. I saw your name in his journal, knew you'd be hurt. I had to warn you, before he does worse. Worse. The word hung heavy. Evan, a predator. Clara, caught. Me, the fool. The letter trembled in my mind, her confession, her doubt. Had she been prey to? Or was Lily lying, protecting her brother? I didn't know what to believe. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Lily's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Months. Evan had known Clara since fall, stalking her, weaving himself into her life while I'd been clueless, elbow-deep in grease and denial. I stood there, hammer still in hand, the kitchen counter a mess of crumpled letter and shattered photo. Lily fidgeted, her blonde hair catching the dim light, her eyes darting to the door like she expected trouble. Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice a low growl. She flinched but held her ground. Because I've seen his journals, pages of her. Photos he never showed her. He's sick, Daniel. I came here to stop him, not you. She reached into her coat, pulling out a folded paper. Look. I snatched it, unfolding it with trembling hands. A photocopy of a journal page, Evan's handwriting, tight and jagged. October 12th, 2024. Saucy at the coffee shop again. She smiled. She's perfect. November 3rd, followed her home. He doesn't deserve her. December 19th, she's warming up. I'll save her. My stomach churned. He'd been watching her, us, long before Chicago. The letter Clara wrote. Was it fear, not betrayal? Where is he now? I demanded. Lily swallowed. Hospital, but he's out tomorrow. He'll come for her, or you. He's furious. Her voice cracked. I'm scared of what he'll do. I stared at her, then at the hammer. The cops wanted me at 10 a.m. Evan was down, but not out. Clara's plane landed at 3. Time was slipping away, and I was trapped in a web I hadn't seen coming. The phone buzzed Clara again. A text. I'm so sorry. Boarding soon. Please answer. I didn't. Couldn't. Lily watched me, hesitant. What are you going to do? She asked. I didn't answer her either. I shoved the journal page into my pocket and pointed to the door. Go. Now. She nodded, slipping out into the night, leaving me alone with a truth I couldn't unsee. Evan wasn't just a fling. He was a hunter. And I'd been prey too until tonight. Dawn broke gray and bleak, the sky a bruise over the house. I hadn't slept. The hammer sat on the coffee table, a silent companion as I pieced it together. Clara's letter, her, I'm drowning, wasn't just about us. Evan had been there, a shadow in her life, pushing, pulling. Had she fallen, or had he dragged her? Lily's warning rang true. His obsession wasn't done. He'd come for her, or me, once he was free. And the cops, they'd pin me for the studio unless I acted first. I showered, the hot water doing nothing for the chill in my bones. At 9 a.m., I drove to the precinct, the hammer left behind, but its weight still with me. Detective Paulson waited, a stocky man with tired eyes. Daniel Grayson, he said, nodding to a chair. Evan Tate's pressing charges. Says you trashed his place, roughed him up. Got proof? He's alive, isn't he? I said, cold. Paulson raised a brow. Barely. Broken ribs, cracked skull. You're lucky he's not dead. I leaned forward. Check his journals. He's been stalking my wife. Months. He started this. Paulson frowned, scribbling a note. We'll look. But you're not off the hook. Stay in town. I left at 10:30, my mind racing. Clara's plane landed in 4 hours. Evan was still in the hospital, but not for long. I drove home, the journal page burning in my pocket. Then my phone rang, Mike, from the garage. Dan, you okay? Cops were here, asking about you. I gripped the wheel. I'm fine. Keep them off me. He hesitated. Clara called too. Said she's scared. Something about a guy. Scared. My heart stumbled. I sped up, reaching the house by noon. Her suitcase still lay open, her letter beside it. I reread it, searching for clues. I don't know what I'll do. Had she tried to escape him? I grabbed my keys again. Airport. I'd meet her there, get the truth. But as I stepped outside, a car screeched to a stop. Lily, wild-eyed, jumped out. He's gone. Evan checked out early, stole my keys. He's coming here. My blood ran cold. The hunter was loose. I shoved Lily back toward her car. Get out of here. Now. She protested, but I didn't listen. Tires squealed as she peeled away. I ran inside, locking the door, my mind a battlefield. Evan was coming. Clara's plane was still hours out. The hammer gleamed on the table. I grabbed it, its heft grounding me. This ended today. The house was silent, too silent, until glass shattered in the kitchen. I spun, hammer raised, as Evan stumbled through the back door he'd smashed. Bandages wrapped his chest, his face bruised, but his eyes burned, wild, unhinged. Where is she? He rasped, a knife glinting in his hand. My knife from our kitchen. She's not here, I said, stepping closer. This is between us. He laughed, a jagged sound. You think you can keep her? She's mine. Always was. He lunged, knife slashing. I dodged, swinging the hammer, which splintered as it hit the counter. He came again, faster, and I felt the blade nick my arm, hot pain searing through me. We grappled, crashing into the living room. He was weaker, injured, but driven by madness. I saved her from you. He spat, pinning me against the wall. The knife hovered. I twisted free, slamming the hammer into his knee. He howled, collapsing, and I kicked the knife away. You destroyed us, I roared, raising the hammer again. Headlights flashed outside Clara. Early. She burst in, suitcase dropping, her scream piercing the chaos. Daniel, stop. Evan grinned through bloodied teeth. Tell him, Clara. Tell him you chose me. She froze, eyes wide, torn. I didn't, she stammered. He wouldn't let me go. That was enough. The cold in me snapped. Clara's words lit the fuse. Evan lunged for her. Broken but desperate, I didn't hesitate. The hammer came down, hard, on his shoulder. Bone crunched, he crumpled, screaming. Clara sobbed, backing away, but I wasn't done. He'd hunted me, ruined everything. I hit again, his arm this time, then his ribs, each blow a release of 8 years of rage, betrayal, loss. Daniel, please. Clara begged, grabbing my arm. I stopped, panting, Evan a heap at my feet, alive but shattered. Sirens wailed, Lily must have called them. I dropped the hammer, its clang echoing as cops stormed in, guns drawn. Hands up, they shouted. I obeyed, numb, Clara crying beside me. They cuffed me, hauled Evan out on a stretcher. Clara tried to explain his stalking, her fear, but I didn't hear it. The cold part of me had won. I'd lost her, lost myself, in that final, violent act. As they led me away, her voice faded. I'm sorry. Prison awaited. Revenge was mine. But the emptiness stayed.